Morning.
Hello, mate.
Right.
Right, I'm taking you somewhere today.
Jolly good. Mirror signal manoeuvre.
Good lad, that's what we like to see. Today I'm going to take you to meet one of the iconic, legendary heroes of motoring and motorsport, actually.
What era? 80s, 90s?
80s, the best era.
80s?
1980s, and this car is Ford Sierra RS 500 Group A Cosworth.
And it's made Andy Rouse British saloon car champion.
Genuine race example.
A genuine race car.
That has raced in period up until the present day at our good friends Clyman's International, the home of fine automobiles. They've got one in for sale and they've invited us to have a look before it moves on to its next owner. And this thing is the proper thing. It really is.
I dread to think how much it is.
It is £189,000 if you'd like to buy it.
Sierra is a car for the open road. A car for the 80s. A car that people will not only be proud to own, but keen to drive. Sierra. Man and machine in perfect harmony.
Have you noticed, Johnny May, that in Meet Your Heroes, a massive proportion of the cars that we feature, and quite rightly so, are homologation cars, aren't they?
Because you can't beat them.
You just can't. I just think as an enthusiast, they are one of the most exciting types of cars. Anything that gets built in order just to go racing or just to go rallying, and the whole design purpose, the whole brief of that car, it's built me something that can win in whatever field I'm going into. And all of the aesthetic touches, all the dynamic touches, all the engineering is built backwards from the desire to sit on the top step of the podium. That's why they're the coolest cars, because they're almost built without compromising, with a very singular purpose. And that doesn't really happen very often in automotive design, does it?
From my perspective, buying and selling a lot of cars over the years, homologation specials are always good news. Good news to buy, good news to sell, good news to drive. They're just one of the best cars that you can actually own, aren't they?
But this, I think, to me, this is the daddy. I mean, they command daddy money. But yeah,
it's serious money at 190, so we're just about to pull in, so let the car do the talking.
Yeah, shall I text Gary to tell him to get the kettle on?
Yeah.
Oh, Johnny, look at that. If 10-year-old me was sitting here right now, I'd be very excited, because I used to go and watch these race as a kid, particularly at Donington, whenever the touring cars were there. There's just something about them. When you think this is basically just a 3-door family hatchback.
A family car turned into a monster.
But they have a presence, don't they? They have a kudos. There's something about a Cosworth, a Cosair, that to me just transcends the fact of what it's based on. Because there are other great race cars, things like the Cavalier, GSI, other contemporary race cars, other contemporary rally cars, but there is something about the way this sits in the showroom, whether it's just the standard Cosworth, the RS500, or the Group A car, that I just think is a little bit special.
Without going too much into values, it's very much at home here, and it's worth a lot more than some of the stuff that's actually in here.
But that's what's crazy, isn't it? This is a 3-door Sierra, basically, and as you say, this is the thick end of £200,000, this car. It eclipses some of the Ferraris that are on sale here.
Yeah.
Eclipses some of the Lamborghinis that are on sale here.
So the reason why these cars are so iconic is because they took the everyday family man or family lady car.
You've got the new car.
Yes. Ta-da! A new look Sierra GL.
And turned them into just motorsport legends. And Ford have always been so good at taking the everyday car, putting an RS badge on it, or chucking it into motorsport, and just making such iconic cars that people desire.
It's true, because during this period, during the 80s, my dad had a Mark 1 and Mark 2 Sierra, and the reason he chose that car was because he really wanted one of these. He couldn't afford one, his company car list didn't have it on it, but he thought he was Andy Rouse when he drove his car, and that's what's so important about it.
But what did he have? What model?
Pretty basic. I think
A
it was a GL.
1.3,
The 1.6 GL was his first one.
It could have been worse. It could have been like one of the early cars. It could have been like the 1.3 3-speed.
Oh, mate. And then he had a Mark 2 with the 2-litre GL. So not an L at least, we weren't fully poverty. But it just goes to show the power of these cars. And it all goes down to Stuart Turner. So Stuart Turner was the head of motorsport. But what's bizarre is really the driving force behind this car was Walter Hayes. Now, Walter Hayes was the head of PR.
Yeah, so he helped develop the GT40, didn't he?
Yeah, well, that's it. So he had stock.
So why did he get so involved on a Sierra?
But this is the thing, because normally that would be like a product decision or a marketing decision. But what's incredible about Ford and the history of Ford is that Walter Hayes, because of what he did with the GT40, and he knew the effect that would have on showroom sales. He thought he could basically drive the process through, obviously with the help of all the technical team as well, but he was the guy, the powering force really, that got this from an idea, and it was hard work as well.
Yeah,
but what really,
especially with the love for Cortina, it was a real struggle. And it was at that period as well, wasn't it, with the Mark III Escort. They really had a bit of a faux pas because they went from the Cortinas, which were loved so much, the Mark II Escort, to designing the Sierra, and the Mark III Escort, which everyone hated because it was front-wheel drive. And they really, but look what they did with them.
Tricky times. But what really flipped it for them, they went to see Cosworth, and Cosworth at the time, by fortuitous circumstance, had developed this engine based on the 2-litre Pinto called the YAA, which is basically twin-cam, 16-valve, normally aspirated engine.
But then they strapped a turbo to it.
That's it, and that's the YB. So they thought they could create an engine for Ford that would fit into this car. There was plenty of room in the bonnet to do it. Cosworth reckoned they could make 204 horsepower. Ford could see there's the basis of a decent Group A racing car there. But Cosworth said you have to do 15,000 units.
That's so many cars though.
But it is, because you only need 5,000 to homologate for Group A, so then what do you do with the other 10,000 engines that you've got? Because you had to commit to the quantity. So anyway, a deal was done. Gearbox-wise, they had to put the T5, the Borg-Warner T5 in, which is basically a Mustang gearbox. But then you think a Mustang is designed to be lots of torque, low down, very few revs.
Yeah.
Of course, this is basically a Revy 16-valve motor. It's all at the top end. So they had to do quite a lot of work.
Two very different cars, aren't they? You know, you've got that naturally aspirated, and then obviously the turbo. So.
But the thing is, they had a lot of data from the XR40i. So over in America, Jack Roush was racing that very successfully. Bizarrely, Andy Rouse, confusing names, raced in the British Touring Car Championship. He also had an XR40i, a Merkur, a car that we didn't sell. Yeah. But it looked enough like the XR4i for management to sign it off.
The XR4i's were a cool thing, weren't they? They were like the introduction to the whale tail as we know it.
Yeah, because you had the biplane rear wing, you had kind of the split, almost like 928-esque rear window at the back. But what that programme taught them, racing the Merkur, was how to strengthen the car, where to do the suspension pickup points, what was good and bad about running a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. That gave them so much data to set this car up, and that laid the game, basically.
Now, Andy Rouse has got an experimental engine with higher turbo boost. It's giving him more power. He's going into Pilgrim's Drop at about 135 miles an hour, and he gets back into the lead.
They committed to 15,000 engines.
Yeah.
But then they had to sell 5,000 road cars
for the
homologation.
But that's it. So then Walter Hayes did a dealer tour thinking, I better just do some kind of check here, some sanity check to see whether the dealers...
And how did that work out for him?
Not very well, it turned out. So he did a quick tour of Europe, chatting to the dealer groups.
It is spring 1982. Men gather in a dusty byroad. They've come to drive a car. The car will be called Sierra.
Said, if we build this car, do you think you could sell it? His best guess was 1,500 orders. He thought that's all he could get. So he knew he had a shortfall he had to fill. And he just kept plugging away. He believed in this project. So he did prototype days, test days where the dealers would come and drive an early car. And he just did a hearts and minds job on them, basically, and got them all excited. But the dealer feedback that came back was, we can sell this car if it's a performance bargain. If this car dramatically undercuts things like the M3, and it was thousands cheaper, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the E30 was, the Sierras were a good £8,000 behind the E30, which in terms of a percentage, because what were these?
Like 2/3, wasn't it?
Yeah, for these, they had to obviously to shift them, make them cheap, really.
Well, that's what the dealer said,
the
make it
options
cheap.
were nothing, were they?
Well, that's it. So you got 3 colours, didn't you? You got 3 colours, white, black, moonstone
blue.
And basically 2 options. You got central lock-in, electric windows.
And
that
was it.
There's a feeling of quiet optimism. They now know they have a good car. As they sign off Sierra, the program enters its final phase, and the run-up to production begins.
And that's how they made it cheap. And that was the key to this car. That was the key to selling this car.
Unquestionably the most important family car on sale in Britain, the Ford Sierra, of course.
Was to make it quick, to make it relatively affordable for most people. Not my dad, sadly. But it was, wasn't it, for most people? I mean, it was what, I think 15 odd grand for a basic, and RS500s a few thousand more than that. They weren't an expensive car in period, relatively speaking.
The days are quite gone when it was enough merely to whack a few flashy extras onto the car to try and boost sales.
I mean, how many RS500s did they make?
Well, they made 5,545 RS Cosworths, of which 500 went to Aston Martin Tickford and were converted into this, the RS500. But let's talk about what makes a Cosworth, first of all.
So the first Cosworth...
Spotter's Guide.
Spotter's Guide.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, there's a few things. Obviously, the arch extensions, which is hilarious because when you see the standard car, they look massively underwheeled, little 7x15 alloy, because it was meant to take something you're familiar with, 10 inches in the rear. That's the thing. 10-inch slick was meant to fit in the back. That's why the arch extension is there. You've then got, obviously, these fabulous fence. You've got the deeper front spoiler. We'll talk about the chin spoiler later because that's RS500. Then round the back, slightly controversial at the time, this big wing. Now, standard Cosworth just got the single wing, not the lower plane, not the gurney flap at the back. But this was because when they looked at the data, the aerodynamic data, this car was generating significant lift at speed. And they wanted this car to run at 300 kilometres an hour, 200 miles an hour. They needed something to stick it down. I don't remember in the 80s, every time you saw a Cosy, it was just that, whoa, Cosy! Because the wing was always the giveaway. In fact, people used to fit these, and we'll find some hilarious cutaway pictures for you. There used to be this kit, didn't there? You could buy the Cosy rear wing look-alike for all sorts of cars, Fiestas, Escorts,
Oh my God,
standard
yes.
Sierras, and you would see a Sierra GL with a Cosworth rear wing replica, wouldn't you?
I'm just thinking max power, so like...
It's got the Vortex spoiler, up-level high spoiler, high-level spoiler.
They looked awful, didn't they?
But we should talk about the engine, shouldn't we? And we should talk about what makes an RS500 an RS500, because that's the one you want. That's
Well, before we get to the engine, the basic cars, the road-going cars, 204 brake, rear-wheel drive, basically 150 miles an hour, so 149.
Yeah.
And then 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds.
Which is
Not
quite quick.
Not too shabby.
No. Let's have a look at the engine, because it's a bit of a peach, isn't it? You're in charge of the prop. So this is obviously 2-litre YB, one of the great iconic engines. You've then got a larger Garrett turbocharger, a larger air-to-air intercooler. They've uprated the fuel injection system, second set of injectors. You've got obviously uprated fuel system, uprated oil and oil cooling system, obviously uprated induction. And then on the Group A car, you've got all of this super sexy triangulation, the roll cage. I mean, just look at the way they've got the negative camber set up here.
Chopping out the turrets.
Yeah. I mean, it runs so much negative, this car does, but that gives it that look, doesn't it? That, to me, is the look. My iconic Cosworth is the Texaco car.
This is the way the road cars should have looked.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, the actual stunts of the road cars are so in.
Yeah.
And we're a big believer of putting spaces on everything.
10-inch in the rear.
10-inch in the rear.
It's Johnny's motto.
Built a lot of race cars over there.
Yeah, that way.
Yeah.
Just had to point that out.
Yeah, just confirming that.
But what's interesting about this car has literally been and raced all over the world, and it's obviously got some celebrity owners. So it's built by Dave Brodie of Brodie Britain Racing, which if you're into Fords or Mazda tuning, one of the all-time greats, using a lot of Andy Rouse parts. And obviously Andy Rouse, his contribution to the whole Sierra program, both with the Merkur, then with the Sierra. You know, he was, to me, he was the god. There was a great bit of footage of him talking in the touring car history program. Because this car's lack of power steering was so heavy, he actually built a training rig every night with a resistance spring. He'd just sit there watching TV, doing that, just to get his arms and shoulders up to the strength he needed to steer the car with no power steering.
Do you think the car would have been loved and been such a success if it wasn't for the fact that they actually did so well in motorsport? Do you honestly think that?
I don't know, but you know what it is? I think Ford have always been absolutely brilliant at just creating an achievable, affordable hero, because we love, don't we, rooting in this country, particularly for the underdog. And I think, you know, a Ford versus a BMW, I think there's that blue-collar charm, isn't it, that Ford is so brilliant at marketing, and that's what Walter Hayes' genius was with this car, is creating something that people thought they could afford. And if they couldn't quite get the Cosworth, like my dad couldn't, you just buy the one down that you can.
So if Walter Hayes got involved, and bearing in mind the history with the GT40, etc., then he obviously, he was a big believer. I don't think he saw it as like the car was a flop.
Yeah.
I think he just saw it being like a PR guru, that he was going to make it.
But this did change the Sierra's fortunes, didn't it? The Sierra was kind of unloved, relatively speaking, in the fleet market. Vauxhall had overtaken them, and previously with the Cortina, they'd always been number one. But when this car started hitting racetracks and started winning, which it did from almost the outset, it was getting poles in its first 6 races, because it was that good. You know, people started to look at the showroom car very, very differently. My dad would not have bought his car, I guarantee it, if it hadn't been for this. So this worked. This worked from its role as a marketing tool.
What
basically.
do you say? Win races on a Sunday?
Sell on Monday, yeah. That's how they do it, isn't it? But we should, if we just close the bonnet as well, mate, if you just do that very carefully on this priceless artefact. It is for sale, by the way, and we'll talk about that later. If you're liking the look of this, you want to add it to your stable, it is for sale. Johnny and I can't afford it, so competition to bid against is quite low. But so, standard RS Cosworth, very cool car. RS Cosworth RS500, exceptionally cool car, and there were some quite subtle differences on the showroom models. The main ones were, again for the geeky spotters, you get the extra lower front lip, this, which manages the air on the front. Obviously you've got at the front here, you've got this extra additional vents, which helps feed the intercooler, the air-to-air intercooler. A lot more has to go into there. At the back of the car, you've got your spoiler.
The massive spoiler. One of the things, it's a bit of a weird thing to discuss, but you'll remember. So the rear rubber spoilers, they always used to go so brittle and hard. But that's supple.
That's lovely, that's supple.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
He's been putting his spoiler moisturiser on that, I reckon.
Yeah.
It feels nice. It's the UV that kills them. The nice thing about race cars, they don't spend that much time outside, do they? So
no.
That's probably what's so nice.
Modelled in clay like the rest of the car, the biplane spoilers would enhance the basic body and improve aerodynamics.
And so debate rages as to how much downforce it actually produces, because generally speaking, spoilers don't generate downforce, wings generate downforce, spoilers obviously manage air, and very much that was the primary purpose of this, was to manage air. The brief was when the car's sitting there at 300 kilometres an hour, 200 miles an hour, to make it stable. And obviously the gurney flap you get on the RS500 on the Group A cars, that really does make a difference. In fact, it took 4 miles an hour, they reckon, off the top speed of the car.
This particular test is late confirmation of prototype performance.
So you hear various things. There's definitely kilos of downforce being generated, probably over 150, 160 kilometres an hour. So it is doing something, and apparently the car is relatively...
But at the higher end rather than low end, yeah.
And that's always the way with air management, isn't it? It's not until you get to the big speeds they actually start to perform a function. And of course, on the RS500, you get this lip, which certainly made the car more stable and managed the air better. And you also get the lower biplane spoiler element as well. And that's always the easy way to tell. If you're following a car, a Cosworth, lucky you, if he's got both wings, generally speaking, unless they fitted them afterwards, it's an RS500.
Loss of the front fog lights.
That's got the air in, well remembered.
To get in, so on the standard Cosworth, you'd have the indicator and the fog lights.
Yeah.
And on the 500s, they removed the fog lights.
Yeah.
Which were a big thing in the 80s and 90s, having front fog.
It was.
They? But it was very functional. It was to feed more cold air to the brakes.
It just looked cooler. It did look cooler.
It was designed to be cooler.
You're cooler.
Let's get some rather more considered views.
I like the front end very much. That's the big attraction, plus the hatchback feature.
So these cars were homologated in 1987, and then the win history started from there.
Just obliterated everything. In fact, there's so many to do, I can't even remember them all, so I've actually written them down. So it won...
So professional.
I know, thank you. So it won the Australian Touring Car Championship twice, it won the DTM once, Japanese Touring Car Championship twice, the AMS Car Series 3 times, the Nissan Mobile 500 Series twice, New Zealand Touring Car Championship 3 times, and it just goes on. BTCC in 1990 with Rob Gravett, of course, as well. Just on it goes, like Sandown, Bathurst, Spa 24 Hours, Macau, just mind blowing.
But that's the thing, it wasn't just a UK born and bred car that just was successful here. You got Japan, New Zealand, Australia, it was everywhere.
That's the
America.
Thing. But what was really interesting is when they went into rallying, then it wasn't quite so successful.
Yeah, rallying wasn't so great for them, was it?
But you think that though, because previously up to that point, of course, they had the Mark 1 Escort Conqueror, Mark 2 Escort Conqueror, so they'd always done really well with rear-wheel drive cars.
But then, as I say, they built this and then they made the Mark 3 Escort front-wheel drive, which obviously, so they had to turn to this because it was a rear-wheel drive car.
But that was the thing, and then of course it was post-Group B at this point, so Group B had been and gone.
Yes.
So it was a whole new world, and people were in that sort of wilderness period that followed. And they thought they'd do this, but what I found bizarre when I looked into the competition history and watched a few videos, so they campaigned this when it was a dry event, or a tarmac rally, or something with light dust. If it was something really muddy and off-road, they actually built an XR 4x4 and ran that, so they had a four-wheel drive car that they campaigned for off-road events or like very loose events, and they had this car that they campaigned if it was a tarmac rally.
But then this car, because it didn't obviously do so successfully within the rallying world, that's what led on to the Escort Cosworth, essentially, which was the...
Well, they did okay, though, because so Didier Auriol actually won outright the Corsica Rally in '88 in this car, which is a testament to his driving. But if you look at people like Stig Blomqvist, Vatanen, people like that, they were always in the top 5 when they ran. So the car was competitive, it was successful.
But it wasn't good enough, was it?
No, that's the problem. If you're Ford and you've just blitzed the world on the circuit, you need to do the same on the rally stages, and this car, like you say, wasn't quite good enough to do.
And as I say, the Escort actually wasn't a ground-up developed car, was it? It was the Sierra 4x4 chassis, essentially, wasn't it?
Well, then we should talk also what happened afterwards, of course, because with all those leftover engines that they had to do something with them. So there was 5,000...
What, those 9,500 engines that they had left over?
Because then, of course, came the Sapphire two-wheel drive Cosworth, a truly iconic car. Then came the Sapphire Cosworth 4x4, which was one of the true 90s icons. But what was interesting about all of these cars is there came a point in the 90s, Johnny's too young to remember, that they just became utterly uninsurable, if we're talking about road cars, in the fact that if you had one of these cars...
Twocker's favourites.
They were. And it just meant that if you had one of these, and particularly the Sapphire Cosworth, because they were the bank car of choice, weren't they? If you were doing a bank job, basically a Sapphire Cosworth 4x4, because it had 4 doors so you could get some blaggers in the back and a decent boot to put your swag in, they were just used for every crime going, and for that reason, because they were relatively easy to steal...
It proved more difficult to catch this speeding Sierra Cosworth, spotted on the A9 north of Inverness.
People were almost giving them away in the 90s. They were literally, in some cases, hundreds of pounds for really shabby ones and low thousands of pounds for really nice ones, because you would spend the same again to insure it, and that's what killed the market. That's why there's so few left. And that's why any car, whether it's a race car or a road car, is worth so much money today. Talking about values, so in roughly 2007, 2008, and I did check this yesterday on the MOT history. Yeah. So I sold a Moonstone Blue 4x4 Sapphire on a J-Reg, which had one lady owner from you, 41,000 miles. She was a nun. She was from Nuneaton, and I remember selling that car. It was 2007, 2008 time, and I sold it for £7,500.
Which would have been a lot at the time.
Yeah, it was top of the money, but the chap said to me when he came and bought it, he said, I'm going to put this car away, and that's it. And the last time it was MOT'd was 2015, so roughly 7 years ago, and the car has done 30 miles since I sold it in that time. But the value from that car, so £7,500 being top money around about 2007, 2008, that car now, it's got to be worth 40.
If you look at Cosworth Values, so a really nice RS500 now in great road condition is probably 110, 115, 120 when they come up, and there isn't all that off them. A race car like this one's up at 189,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but not when you compare it to the fact that this is a fully papered Group A car. It's eligible for almost everything. It's got a pucker competition history, because there are 3 continuation cars being made at the moment, and they start at about 180, I think. And of course, that's just a brand new bare shell, no provenance, no history. So this,
and this car has been about, hasn't it?
Well, this is a pucker thing. This is in its original livery. This is race. This is won. This has been through the mill and done all the things you want a race car to have done. And if you own this car, if you have the money to buy it, and I'm sure Gary will happily talk to you if you do, you can enter it in loads and loads of things. You can have a lot of fun with it. And what's nice about this is up until very recently, the previous owner has done just that. This hasn't been stuck in a workshop or stuck in a collection. This car has been raced a lot and driven a lot. And despite that, it's still in beautiful condition, isn't it?
Yeah, I think with the kind of ownership where these cars are now, with the people that are using them, they are refreshed after every race. You know, where there's scuffs on the floor, they're repainted just to make them proceed. I know it's a lot of money, and it is a Ford Sierra, but with the way cars are going, especially combustion engine, they're historic racing.
But also, that's the thing, that if you've got the money to buy this and the money to compete with it, that's to me where all the enjoyment is in these cars, because you can always take them on a track and drive them absolutely flat out.
I do think that if you put 99% of the population who think they can drive into one of these with 500 brake horsepower and say go, they'll just be spinning all over the place. So that is what makes you appreciate looking back at the racing in the 90s and the BTCC, where these guys are absolutely flat out, and they're such good drivers, aren't they?
Different level of skill and
I mean,
talent.
it really is, to get that power down and to not spin out.
So there you go, that's the latest episode of Meet Your Heroes. We do try and bring you the nice homologation cars, but this week we've gone one better. We've brought you a genuine race car. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Do like and subscribe. Do hit the notification bell. Do leave us your comments, other cars you'd like to see. And yeah, thanks for watching.